Good morning. My name is Kyle Houchins. I'm a technical trainer for McNeil, and this is Getting Started Rhino for Windows. If you are new to these sessions, we do these a little bit differently than a lot of software demos that you may have seen. Basically, what I try to do is as closely simulate the experience that you'll have as a designer if someone walks into your office, throws a sketch on your table, and says, "Build this for me," preferably in under an hour. Anybody who does this kind of work for a living understands the excitement and anxiety and chaotic emotions that all come from that experience. And for some God unknown reason, I chose to set up these webinars to simulate that. So you won't need your camera, so you can turn that off. It helps to save bandwidth. And you won't need your mic actually, you won't need your mic at all. Any questions that you have, please ask in the chat. I encourage you to ask questions. If I do something and you see something and you're like, what in the world was that? Hit the chat. I'll try and go back and explain it a little bit. And, we'll do a little riff on what's going on. So I'm using Rhino 8 on a Windows machine. The nice thing about Rhino 8 is it's fairly consistent cross-platform. So if you actually are joining us on a Mac, you should be able to keep up and see what's going on. Don't try to model with me. You'll get lost because I'm going to go pretty fast. All of these get posted on our YouTube channel, which is Rhinoceros 3D on YouTube later. So if you want to go back and go through it at your own pace, please do so there. Just take notes, watch, enjoy, ask questions. Heckle. Whatever. No, don't heckle. My ego can't take it. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this. So in any model that I usually start, unless I'm just starting from scratch and trying to figure something out in 3D, I typically do some sort of noodly little drawing. And in this case, there's this kind of classic Pocketknife form that has this kind of roundy handle. It has a little bit of nuance in the shape that we're going to try and capture. But the most interesting thing about this, and if we let me jump into a sketch program here real quick, and we'll just do a little strategy sesh. If I open this image and we look at it, the section on this tends to be very roundy, right? This thing is very kind of shaped like this. It's got a constant curvature in this direction. It's got a constant curvature in this direction. Same thing down here. This handle wraps around in both directions. And so I typically kind of refer to this kind of shape as a Tylenol, right? And it was a disparaging term when I was going to school to be a car designer. And if your car was referred to as a Tylenol, that was not necessarily a good thing. But the interesting thing about these constant curvature shapes is they tend to be kind of difficult to model, right? We could do the simple thing, and we could just draw a line down the center, and we could pipe this thing, right, with round caps on it. But the problem is you end up with a tube, and then you end up with a circular cap that has a pole in the end, and you end up with a surface that kind of looks like this. And this becomes a little bit difficult to edit because this surface and this surface are separate. This is end up being a poly surface, and so you end up getting a polytylenol, I guess. But the cheap and easy way to do this form, just draw a line straight down the center, pipe it with round caps, and then go from there. We're going to try and do a little bit more nuanced version of that. I'm going to back up a little bit. And what we're going to do is talk about using a proxy surface or using a tool surface or however you want to refer to it. And then we're going to use blend surface to kind of get where we need to go. So if we were to take this and look at it in 3D, and I'm going to just kind of hack this together real quick. So if we come through and we say this shape kind of goes something like this, and it doesn't go like that, but let's just say it does. And I were to draw that curve and extrude it, right? And we just like this. So now I've got a surface that looks like this. What I can do is I can split this surface here and here with an iso curve so that I end up with surface 1 and surface 2. And then what I can do is use a blend surface to create a surface that has continuity built into it. And this is the shape that we're going to end up using. We'll take this one and we'll throw it away. So that's kind of how I'm going to approach this. And what that allows us to do is very finely tune in this profile like this, and then create this blend surface that has continuity in both directions and is going to give us a little bit better version of topology than we would have gotten had we done this, where we've got surface 1, surface 2, surface 3, right? And we had to edit those all together. So that's kind of, when I look at a shape like this, I think to myself, maybe that's a good idea for that kind of surface. We'll see. They may shoot this right into the fan and we'll figure it out along the way. That's one of the fun parts about this. I come up with a sketch either the day before or the night of or the morning of or 10 minutes before the video, and then I put it away and I don't practice it. I don't really think too much about it. I just try to see it with fresh eyes like you would experience if you have. Now, a couple of considerations. There's a little notch right here that we're going to have to handle, which means that we're probably going to have to build over this section and then trim something out. We've got a couple of material changes. We've got a couple of little rivets that need to get in there. We have a blade that has a secondary little step on it. All that kind of stuff we'll try and sort out. So the first thing that I always do, and I'm going to delete this and start from the beginning, is I run the picture command. I find my image and then I just click and drag it into the scene. And it'll just come in as, if we go into perspective view, it just comes in with a plane with a picture frame material mapped on it. If I go to my material tab over here, you can see that there is actually a material that is a picture material, which behaves a little bit differently than some other materials. Pictures are a little bit of an outlier as far as how they behave, but that's pretty much what we've got here. Now we can move it, we can rotate it, we can scale it, we can do all that kind of stuff. And typically what I like to do is I like to pull these out of what I refer to as the modeling envelope, because if I were to start modeling something and go into shaded view, and this was still stuck at the origin like that, the model kind of obscures the image and it makes it difficult to work with. So I typically just grab it, drag it straight back in space. And then from front view, it looks fine, but in perspective view, if I were to actually, rotate around this, it's outside of the modeling window. Now, I get comments in the YouTube comments all the time about the fact that I never set scale, and I do that just because I'm trying to move fast and it's a demo and I'm not actually making this. But in deference to that, let's figure out how big this thing is. These things in real life are about 5.5 inches long, and actually I was pretty close. So this is 5.17 inches. I'm working in inches. I'm an old, dumb American, so do with that what you will. Translate it to millimeters. That's what Google's for. And let's just draw a 5.25, 5.25 inch line. And we can compare that to our drawing. I just kind of started at the tip here and then came out. And so let's use the scale command, and I'm going to just scale from the end of this, and I'm going to use this kind of here, and then I'm going to just drag it out till it touches, and then I know that this drawing is within the ishiness of this particular demo. It's the right size. So if we go into perspective view, we know this is out of the modeling window. We know it's the right size. So the last thing we need to do is go to the layers tab. All right, so we've got this here. I'm going to take this and set it on this layer. I'm going to just right click and say change object layer. And then that way I know this is on this layer. And then I'm going to actually, before I lock it, I'm going to go to the materials panel, and I'm going to crank up the transparency of this a little bit to fade the image out. And that way it makes it a little easier to build over because it's a little easier to see. Then I'll go back to my layer, lock this, and now it's stuck in the modeling window and I can't select it, but it's there for reference. All right, so let's jump into the crux of this thing, which is the handle. And the simplest way to approach this is just to start with a curve. I'm just going to start vaguely at the pole. I'm going to shift drag straight up, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to poke a point at the apex of each transition. And the reason that I'm doing that, and you'll see that the curve doesn't quite meet where I want it to be, but I'm predicting a little bit where this stuff is going to end up. And I'm just don't want to overdo it, but I also want to make sure that I have enough stuff to work with. Now, you're like, wow, that looks terrible. But what I did was I set this thing up based on what I like to refer to as rule of three. And rule of three is essentially it only takes 3 points to make a transition, right? If I have a transition like this, I've got 1, 2, 3. If the transition is tighter, these are going to come closer together, right? If it's going to be softer, they're going to be farther apart. What I don't want to do when I make a transition is I don't want to go like that, right? I don't want that because that is going to lead to a curve that has a curvature profile that looks something like this, right? See that? This is a disaster from a curvature point of view, which is the reason why you don't do that. So if I take that same curve and I do it correctly, and I start with an anchor point, and then 1, 2, 3, look at the curvature profile on this thing. Much less horrible. Okay, look at the comparison. Okay, so when you use a limited number of points, you're doing two things. First of all, you're letting Rhino do the heavy lifting. Okay, Rhino is really, really good at saying this point, this point, this point, this point, and this point. I'm going to draw a smooth curve through those. So the less information you put in here, the more you're letting Rhino determine what this curve is. And when you let Rhino determine what the curve is going to be perfect because Rhino's a little it's a little fussy about that. So when you do this, what you're saying is curve has to go through here, curve has to go through here, curve has to go through here, 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 here. It has to go through those points because you said there's a point there. Well, between here and here is nice and smooth, but between here and here is a curvature disaster. So if you run into situations where your models are not smooth, your surfaces are difficult to edit and all that kind of stuff, it's because you're not following kind of rule of three. And rule of three translates even further down the line if you want to do a curve that transitions into another curve. So if we have a situation like this, where it's an S curve, you don't need any more than, we can do things like this, right? And if I look at the point structure on it, this is just an anchor point. This is a transition. So if I take this and I tighten it up, I can make this transition quite sharp. And this one is now going to be wide. Now the problem is this point is shared between this transition and this transition. So if I want to be able to independently control this transition and that transition, I need to have my curve structure look like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now I've got these transitions. I can control this transition. Look what happens. When I do this, nothing's happening here. So I can make this nice and soft. I can make this very sharp. And this is how I get detail and nuance in my model without a whole lot of complication. Okay, I did a whole video on rule of three. If you want to check it out, jump on our Rhinoceros 3D on YouTube and check it out and just search for the rule of three video. Okay, it has far-reaching implications in NURBS, sub-D, all that kind of stuff. So if we look at the way I drew this curve, we've got a shape here, right? Like this. And there's a transition. It starts from here and it starts to curve from here to here. How many points did I use? 1, 2, 3. There's a transition that goes from here to here. 1, 2, 3. There's a dip in this. 1, 2, 3. There's a rise here. Now I'm going to share this point because it's a smooth transition, but this is 1, 2, 3 makes up that transition. These 3 make up that. These 3 make up that. These 3 make up that. That's it. That's how you get nice, smooth, clean curves. Now, we have to do a little bit of editing, and that's fine. So let's do that. Let's turn on the points, and we're just going to start massaging these a little bit to get the shape that we want. And you will find occasionally that you have misread the room, so to speak, and you do actually need a second set of 1, 2, 3 in order to get your transitions to work. And I don't think that's going to be the case here, but occasionally what you'll run into is you'll think that this 1, 2, 3 is enough, and actually what you need is a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, because this transition is like a double changing, curvature or whatever. So, but start as light as you possibly can, and then add from there. You can always add points. There's an insert control point up here, edit, control points, insert control point right here. You can always add another point if you need it. You can also get rid of them if you've overdone it, but I find that it's easier to start light and then go from there. Okay. So let's pull this out a little bit. I find the nudge tools work lovely for this type of editing. If you don't have your nudges turned on, tools options, modeling aids, nudge right here. I have it set to my arrow keys. I think by default it's Alt arrow, but I always change it to just arrow. And then you can decide whether you want it to be just the arrow is this big, Control plus arrow is that big, and Shift plus arrow is that big. So you can set 3 different steps of nudginess. And so I'm going to just use my arrow keys to very gently kind of pull this thing into shape. And I'm not going to go crazy, and I always say that, and then I spend more time editing it because design. Okay, so I've got my curve now, right? And my shape needs to go this way, which means I need something to blend to, because we're going to use blend surface, right? Which means I have to extrude this way. And in this case, I extruded that curve and I turned it into a solid object. So I'm just going to delete these 2 things. So now that this is an open surface. Now I've got a seam here because it's a NURB surface, and my curve started and ended there. So I've actually got a break here already. But what I don't have is anything down here right now. It's a continuous surface. So if I try to blend to itself, I can't, because it's a closed curve and it blend needs 2 inputs. So what I'm going to do is use the split tool, and I'm going to right click to split by isocurve. This is going to be the surface that I'm splitting. I'm going in the wrong direction, so I'm going to hit T enter, and that's going to allow me to move this over here. And I'm going to just kind of aim for the apex. I'm going to just kind of use that isoparam right there. And if I run an O snap, you can see there's a knot there. So I'm going to just use that, and I'm going to split this now into 2 pieces. Now, the cool thing about that, I'm going to hide my curve, is now that I've got 2 surfaces, I can invoke a blend surf, which is this guy, and I can just blend from here to here. And you'll see what happens is it makes that beautiful Tylenol shape, because it's calculating curvature in all directions. So because this original surface was very simple, our interior shapes and all of the stuff in here is also very simple. Now, I'm going to set this, I'm going to get rid of the interior shapes. And maybe we need some interior shapes. Okay, fine. And I'm going to lock this so that all the handles move together. And then I can mess with the shape on this and decide how thick this thing needs to be. Now, by default, it was much thicker than I actually needed. So I'm going to actually back this off kind of somewhere in there. And we can even experiment and say, does it need to be curvature, or can we get away with tangent? Because curvature actually adds another point to the surface, which we may or may not need. In this case, I think tangent's probably fine, and that yields a simpler surface anyways. And so I'm going to make it just a little fatter. And I'm going to just say, okay, now I can delete this. And we end up with a really nice layout. Look how simple that is. Look how easy that is to edit if we want to go into points. And let's do that. Let's go into the top view and look at the distribution of the points that make up the outer surface of this thing. Now, from a sculpting point of view, if I wanted this handle to have some nuance, and I got to turn my grid snap off, I know because of rule of three, right? This is the first row, this is the second row, this is the third row, which means that these points right here control this shape in this area. If I wanted to add a little bulge or a little pinch, I could do that because this is super easy to understand. In my case, what I actually want is I want to grab all of these and I actually want to scale them to 0 because I want this to be very flat along the edge. And so what we've done is we've taken out any crown or dip that's in that thing because we lined up these points right here. Now, we didn't mess with our tangency because all we did was move in this direction. It doesn't matter how far away we are from here or how close we are to here, as long as we don't cross it, it's still going to be tangent, right? So all we did was take all of these tangent points right here and make them all equally tangent. Now, the only other thing that we want to take a look at, and we can do this if we run the zebra command, is to see what our kind of curvature distribution looks like, especially at the ends. We want to make sure that there's nothing funky going on down here. And I don't know about you, but that looks pretty okay to me. We can also run an EMAP evaluation on it and just see what it looks like with a really reflective material on it. And in this case, I'm pretty okay with that. I think that looks pretty good for what we need to do. So we've just pulled the crux on this climb. We just got over the hardest part of this, and everything else from here on out is kind of going to be gravy. So the cool thing about this is I can now run the cap command, and this is now a closed poly surface. I can then take this surface, Control-Shift-Click, and I'm just going to pull this out a little bit. And sure, I could measure that, and I would be doing that if it was a client project, but I'm going to eyeball this because that's really all I need to do at this point. Now I've got a closed poly surface, but I've got some surface differentiation between this and this, which is great because that means I can take and apply a material to these and a different material to this, which is great because we have a different material here and we have a different material for those rivets. So let's go ahead and add that. So we're going to do a little bit of splitting. So I'm going to just do a simple 3-point curve through here. Now, don't misunderstand me. There are situations where you're going to need more than 3 points that make up a curve, but you don't need more than 3 points to make up a transition. So anytime you're bending from one thing up or down, right? When we're making shapes, we're either bending down or we're bending up. It's only 3 that makes that differentiation, and you only need a separating point right here if you need to control this transition different than this transition. If you want this transition and this transition to smoothly blend together, get rid of the extra point. So now it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, because they share this space right here. And then that way your transitions are perfectly smooth, but they do affect each other. So if you need to do them separately, each one gets their own 3. If you need to do them together, they get to share a point. So I'm going to just grab this and I'm going to use this cutter on the gumball, and I'm going to just drag this out but hold down shift, and I'm just going to blast my way all the way through that. And what that's going to do is break this and this. Okay. Now I could get fussy about this and like break this up into its own thing and break this up into its own thing and then join this and this and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not super concerned about that because I'm pretty much trying to go fast. This is like kind of the first sketch model. Something that I want to kind of want to just smack this together and throw it through a printer and see how it feels. And so speed and kind of capture of the concept is the most important part of this model. at this point. And we can always go back and tighten this up later. So I'm just going to rip those through there. And actually that made a hole, so I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do, this made a hole because it was a closed curve, and this just made a cut because it was an open curve. So I'm going to actually extrude these guys and then go up here and do a Boolean split. And we're going to delete the inputs. Should only be one there, yeah. All right, and so now we've got this, we've got our rivets. Everything is pretty much in good shape. Now, the last thing that we kind of need to do for this handle is add this little step in here, and I'm going to just draw that. Again, I'm going to just put an anchor point out here, and then I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, and then it's got a little transition in this way, which means this is going to be my first point, that's going to be my second point, and that's going to be my third. And then that way I can control, again, I can control this 1, 2, 3 transition differently than this 1, 2, 3 transition. So all I have to do is decide how much bendy does this have. Is it this much inny or that much outy or whatever I'm going to do, right? So that's, and it becomes super easy to understand. If you follow this, you'll never get lost. You'll never be like, well, how do I make that shape do that? You'll be like, well, where's the middle point? Because the middle point is going to bend it up or down. You've got 2 anchors in the middle. That's it. Make it simple. Make it easy for yourself. Don't make this stuff any harder than it has to be, because it's really not. Don't tell your clients, but it's really not that hard. Okay, I'm going to just use the cutter on the gumball. If you didn't see what I just did, click this. There's this little cutter, drag, hold shift. It's going to just wing that through. Because it's open, it makes a cut, not a hole. So I'm just going to delete that. Get rid of that now. And then we'll just do a little blend on this. So I'm going to right click, variable radius blend, and we're going to go and add a little blend on this. It's way too big. So we're going to set all and say like 0.1. It's still too big. You can tell because the handle's red. And I can figure out about how big it needs to be by dragging the handle and say, well, 0.022 is a bizarre size. Don't do that. If this is going to a machinist or a CNC machine, the machinist will want to strangle you if you give them a weird size like this. So change it up here, set all, 0.02. Make it something standard that they're going to have a bit that fits that. If you give them a 0.022 and they have to make a custom cutter to actually cut that radius, they are gonna hate you. So let's preview that and take a look. That probably does what it needs to do. In fact, we might even be able to drag this down a little bit. Again, 0.15 is like a standard-ish size, so that's something that would make sense. Don't do 0.015374. You will not be a popular person with the machinists in your company. Okay, so let's take a look and see what we've got. So we're pretty much where we need to be. And so let's do some fun stuff, and let's grab some materials. So let's grab import from the material library that's built into Rhino. Let's grab a wood. Let's grab something fun like a walnut. And let's do a walnut. Walnut dark. Let's do that. Just going to drag it onto the model, and it has applied itself very nicely. Now, if there was any issue with how this was applying, pick the object, go to the object properties, and go to mapping, and it's going to tell you if there's any issues. And actually, it's telling us that there's an issue. Some of the assigned materials are using world coordinate system or object coordinate system or world coordinate system box style. These textures may not be affected in the dialog below. Click here to fix this automatically. Well, if I click that, see how the texture changes just a little bit? And so now what it's doing is it's changing this to surface mapping, and I can control this down here, meaning if I want to rotate this or change the size or anything like that, I can do that. What I've done now is basically unified all of the mapping styles so that I can control that But in this case, it's actually mapping correctly, so I'm not going to mess with it. So let's make some metal materials. See, I'm proving that I don't rehearse this stuff. And let's add some metal to these parts. I'm going to Control-Shift-Drag these surfaces back here. And then I'm going to click and add all of this. And I'm going to right-click, Assign to Object. And let's make sure we got them all. We didn't get the bottom one, so I'm going to Control-Shift-Click that, make a sub-object selection. And then we've got all of our metal parts defined. Okay? Now, the one thing that we might want to do is change the environment mapping on this. Right now it's got a studio mapping, and it's kind of a little bit of a chaotic reflection pattern in there. It's got that like window, and it doesn't have a very nicely defined horizon line through this thing. And if you look at our model, it's a much simpler kind of layout, and we can get a simpler layout like that. If we go to the import from modeling library or from environment library, I like the automotive studio. And so let's use that one, right click, set all for environment channels. And it's going to change the reflections on this. And you can see that that's a little bit more what we're looking for. Now, I don't like this blue. I don't like that. So I'm actually going to click on the studio itself. I'm going to go to the basic environment settings. I'm going to actually click on the image itself, which is going to take me to the image editor. And I'm going to go to the saturation. I'm just going to drag it out. And that's going to get rid of any color that's in this thing. And you'll see that now that blue is gone. If I want a little bit of blue, but not as much blue, I can do that. Now it's got a little, maybe just a tiny bit more, just not as much as it had. So that's got a little tiny bit of blue in it. And then maybe the handle, maybe the wood, we want just a little bit more reflection in the wood. It's set at 100% roughness right now. I'm going to crank this down a little bit. And you'll see that it starts to pick up a little light as I get rid of roughness. And it's starting to feel a little more like kind of an oiled or a waxed wood as opposed to something. If we crank the right roughness all the way out, it goes polished. So if you want to go real fancy, you can do that. But I think I like kind of just more of a oiled finish. So let's just crank that up just a hair more like that. That works. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of the curves because we don't need them anymore. We can also play with different metals in here. Like we can decide like if I want to go with a different metal, we can go to the color in here and say maybe these rivets in here are brass. Maybe that's something interesting. Say, do we like that? Or are you like me where you see gold and silver together and it makes your eyeballs itch? I'm going to leave it at silver. All right, so we've got this part done. Let's do the blade lock. And now just to be clear, I'm not doing any of the mechanism or anything like that. This would purely be something that I would throw together to see whether the handle feels good in my hand and throw it through a printer and then try it again. So I've got kind of a double curving shape here. So I need a point here, I need a point here, I need a point here, and I need a point down here. That gives me everything I need to be able to edit this shape in. Everybody adds too many points because when they're drawing, the curve doesn't land where they want it to land. You got to stop thinking about it that way. You got to start predicting. When you know where what the points do, you can figure out where they need to be in order to get the curve you want instead of actually getting the curve you want. So draw your curve like that, right? If I hide this, don't draw it like this. Don't just trace it and say, well, that makes the curve. That's a good curve, right? No, this is a garbage curve. And the reason it's a garbage curve is you asked for way too many points, so Rhino can't make the curve smooth. So don't do it like that. Do it like this. Figure out where the points go, let Rhino draw the curve, and you end up with a much smoother curve profile. Okay? Now, this isn't a kink. This is a curvature change. People look at this and they say, oh my God, that's a kink. Nope, that's a curvature change. It just means the rate of curvature has changed. So I've got this. I'm going to just close it with a straight line using the close command. And then I'm going to set this here. And then I'm going to just extrude it enough that it shows up. Now let's take this whole thing. We're going to mirror it around here. Oop, missed it. So let's mirror this. I'm going to mirror it around there. For some reason, that is not mirroring around my point. All right, we'll figure that out later. So that gives us the width of the knife, and that feels good. Actually, from a top view, like the proportions on that feel good. And if they didn't, I can just adjust it, right, by scaling the entire thing. But I feel that feels all right. So let's go into the blade. And the blade has a couple of elements. It's got a flat piece in here that's kind of extruded. It's got a little thumb, flippity-doo-dah up here. It's got a logo on it, and then it's got a bevel down here that we need to model in. So the first thing we want to do is certainly just start with drawing the curves. And I'm going to start at the point because that's kind of a reasonable place to start. It has a slight dip here, right? A little like that. And then it's got a rise, and then it falls back down, which means I need a point here so I can determine how much uppy downy goes that way. And then I need a point here. And granted, like, if I was tracing this, I would go da, 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 da. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to predict where this point needs to be, and I'm going to place the point, and then I'm going to pull the curve where it needs to end. All I have to do to fix that, because it didn't land exactly where I want, I'm just going to nudge it a little bit. So when you start drawing by placing points where they need to be as opposed to placing curves where you think they need to be, your curves are going to get a lot simpler, your models are going to get a lot cleaner, and you're going to have a lot less trouble editing what you need to be editing. Like that. There is a kink here, so I'm going to end that curve. I'm going to edit this guy like this. Make it pointy enough that the Stabco people are happy with it. And then I'm going to add a straight line from here approximately to where the end of that thing is. I'm going to just hide everything except for the curves. I have a hotkey set up for isolate, and I have a hotkey set up for select curves. So what just happened there was I selected the curves using my hotkey. So cell curve, CRV, SEL, CRV is the command for selecting curves. And then isolate is the command to isolate everything except what you had selected. So I selected curves, and then I said isolate those curves so it hit everything else. So everything else is just hidden for the time being. So I can grab this and join it, and then I can run the close command, which just puts a straight line segment in the open part, and I've got basically what I need for this blade. So let's go into the top view, and I'm going to shift drag on the extrude handle approximately as wide as I think this needs to be. And for some reason, this is not landed in the center. So let's get this in the center. I'm just going to snap this to there. Oops. Let's get everybody. If your gumball isn't set up to snap, there is a setting in Gumball itself down here called snappy dragging. If you set this, I think it's default to smooth dragging, change it to snappy dragging, and then it will respect all of your O-snaps in here. I run my O-snaps disabled because it allows me to be able to work in space without having it snap to anything. But if I hold down the Alt key, now the disable is disabled, and that allows me to be able to snap to stuff. So I can switch between being smooth or being snappy depending on whether I just hold down the Alt key. And it looks like my rivets disappeared for some reason. Where did they go? All right, so let's fix that. I'm going to double click, and I'm going to just snap this to the bottom of that, and then I can snap this to the edge. Double click to relocate the gumball, hold down Alt to snap to that quad, drag out here, and then snap to there. And then that way I can locate stuff easily. And it looks like I didn't mirror these over, so let's do that. Looks like I mirrored one of them over. Mirror. That mirror worked. I wonder why the other one didn't work. I don't know, I'll have to go back and watch the video and try and figure out what I did wrong. I always do that. I'll do a video and then I'll be editing it and I'll be like, oh, all I needed to do was be less dumb in front of people. I always want to get everybody's phone number and be like, wait, I figured it out. Either that or someone's in the comments just like jumping up and down yelling like, do this. All right, so let's get this. Looks like, let me go into shaded view and try and figure out what's going on here. There's something weird going on here. We've got a little weirdness, so I'm going to hide this for the time being. This looks like it's not exactly centered at 0, so I'm going to place a point at 0, and then I'm going to grab all of this stuff. And the cool thing is the gumball goes to the bounding box center of an object. So if I select everything, I know that the gumball is in the center. And then I'm just going to use snappy dragging and snap it to align it to that. So now this whole thing is all centered back up. And when I bring my blade in, then I can scale this. I'm going to make the scale handle longer by double clicking it and dragging it. And then I'm going to just dial this in a little bit so that it's got the right width to fit that. Now, if I was doing this for a client, I would 100% measure this. I'd know all of the widths and all of that kind of stuff, but I am using eyeball math here and just kind of doing something that I think looks good. So let's break this blade up and get our details. And there's going to be a little bit of complication in how this is made. So the first thing, I'm probably going to have to do a little back and forthing on this to get it to do what I want it to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is split this. So now I've got this object and I've got this object. And this object needs to be flat on the sides because that's where the pivot goes. So that is this little shank that comes in here, and there's a pivot inside here that allows this thing to spin around. And I'm not going to bother trying to figure that out for this demo, but that's just kind of where we would need to be. Now, I want to focus on this part for a second. And I need to make the blade needs to actually curve down here and then bevel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually disassemble this thing a little bit. I don't need that surface for the time being. And I'm going to disassemble, actually I'm just going to explode this whole thing. And I want to be able to figure out where the center point on this thing is. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to use the extract isocurve command. And I'm going to pick this surface, and then I'm going to use O snaps, and I'm going to grab the midpoint. So now I've got a curve right in the center, which means I can get rid of this surface. So now that I've got that surface, I can draw a curve from here to here, and I have a hotkey set up. Actually, I don't have a hotkey set up. Line from 4 points. Okay, let's do this one. So I'm going to snap from here to here, and then I'm going to delete this surface. And what that is going to let me do is draw a curve, and I need a curve from now here to here. So let's do that one. So let's extract this curve by duplicating that edge, and then I'm going to get rid of the top surface up here. And then I'm going to take this curve, and you can see that because that surface was simple, the curve that I extracted is simple, which means I can move this point and just snap it there, and it gives me the curvature that I was looking for, like that. And so now I can run, and I think I want a little bit of curvature in this thing, so I'm going to turn the points on here. And you'll notice that it's only got 2 points. I can't do anything with 2 points because I don't have a center point in order to be able to control it, right? So I'm going to actually change degree on this from degree 1 to degree 3, and what that's going to do is create a single span curve with 4 points, which means I can now grab these two and I can pull them out like that. Now, you're saying, like, why didn't I use 3 points, right? I just had a single transition in here, but I actually think this curvature is a little bit more complicated than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to snap this point to be tangent, dead vertical here in the Z, and then I'm going to let this 3-point transition kind of happen naturally. And then what I can do is just run a 2-rail sweep on here between this curve and here, and that's going to end up giving me a surface that I can then mirror, and it should give me a pointy blade shape. Now, there is a secondary bevel on here, and I'm going to add that in a second. And I might even want to pull this curve out a little bit more to allow myself to have that bevel. So maybe what I even want to do is maybe I even want this to be snapped like that. So these three are all aligned in the Z, and then this one is the one that's bending over. Let's try that and see how it works. There's a little bit of nuance on trying to make this do what you want it to do. So let's mirror that and see what it looks like. And then we can decide, like, does this blade need to be fatter at the top? You know, whatever. We can do that kind of stuff. We can just loft the top of this back together. And we don't need to do anything down here because it's going to join to the other one. So let's take that. And before we join that up, let's add the secondary bevel. And if I take this curve, I've already got it. I'm going to move gumball here just by double-clicking that C-plane waffle and then snapping it down here. And then I'm going to double-click this handle to make it longer, because the longer the handle is, the slower the transition happens. And then I'm going to just click and drag it, and I'm going to scale that curve up a little bit. And when I scale that curve up a little bit, you'll notice it makes a very nice transition through there. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that. Let's make sure it goes all the way to the end. Like that. I'm going to use this, and I'm going to trim this edge off. And I'm only going to trim one edge off at this point because I want, let's see, I need to get that change, that shape change in there. So let's take this surface. I'm going to duplicate this edge here. I'm thinking while I'm doing this. That's what the smoke is from. And I need to alter this shape just a little bit. So let's turn the points on for this surface. And then what I can do is actually grab all of these points down here of the original surface, change the curvature of it a little bit, and then that's going to give me room for the bevel to happen. Because if I just drop the bevel in here, right, all it's going to happen is it's going to put back basically what we took off. So I'm going to pull this out a little bit like that. And now when I loft, or 2-rail sweep, or whatever you want to do, but if I loft from here to here, now I get that bevel. See that? Now it's there. So now when I join these two, and I mirror this, that one's probably not going to join. Let's join this up. Let's loft the top of it together. That. is now starting to look nice and bladey. I can get rid of this surface for the time being. I'm going to join these two together and then turn on my naked edges, which lives down here. It's a show edges command. And everywhere there's pink, the model is unjoined, which means that we've got some holes to fill through here. So there's a couple of ways that we can do this. I could undo that, right? And go back and I could try capping this. So now this is a closed object, this is a closed object. We could try and see if these will Boolean, but a lot of times, in this case it worked, which is nice. And a lot of times if you have coincident surfaces, and by coincident surface I mean if you have an object that looks like this, you've got this object and this object, these two faces right here, if they are exactly coincident, oftentimes in older versions of Rhino, this will fail. This will fail in 4, 5, 6, and 7. It started working well in 8, and it works really well in 9. So coincident faces are much better handled in 9 than they are in 8. But in this case, this actually worked. It's a closed poly surface, and so we're good to go. So let's take a look at that in relationship with our model. Let's add a metal material to that. And you can see that we've got our bevel is nice and sharp. We can see where it is. So when we render it, when we position the model, we'll do it in a way that we get some reflection down here. So let's add a logo to it. And then the last thing we need to do is just add the little thumb thing and crack off a final rendering. I think we'll be out of here in an hour, which is fantastic. So let's go to the top view. I'm going to hide my curves, and I'm going to go to shaded view because it's easier to see. And we just need to make this little shape. And the typical one, I think, is almost exactly round. I think we may enhance that just a bit. And I think what I would like it to look like is more in character with the end of the object. Do this in wireframe so we can actually see. I kind of want this to have like a little family of shapes kind of vibe going on here. So this kind of feels like it kind of fits in there a little bit. Maybe it sticks out just a hair. And then we go to the front view, and then I'm going to just kind of wing this off right here. Hold down the cutter, and one thing to keep in mind is when you're using this gumball cutter, anything that's visible, it'll cut. So I tend to isolate the object, cut it, and then bring stuff back. And I think I would like this to follow actually the top of the blade too. So let's duplicate this curve, and I'm going to do that. I have all this stuff in my pop-up. I'm trying not to use my pop-up. I'm trying to show you where this stuff lives. We're going to duplicate this edge, and then isolate just those two objects, and then we can use the gumball cutter. Hold down shift, it goes both directions, and we'll delete that. And that should make that directly follow that shape there. Now, I may want that, I don't know whether I want it dead flush or whether I want it to be slightly proud. I think I might want it to be just the tiniest bit. So there's a small mechanical separation in there. Let's Boolean those two together. And then what if we want some nuance in this thing? Inside my head, it's going, Kyle, leave it alone. Kyle, leave it alone. Hands are going, let's do it. So let's do it. Let's add some nuance in top of this thing. This is where it all goes into the fan. Be a designer, they said. All right, location of point object. I'm going to use the between switch, and I'm going to hit B, enter. And if you don't know what the between switch is, what it does is it says, okay, pick 2 points, and I'm going to drop this between it. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go, ideally, there. Now what it did was it dropped a point right between there. And if you don't have that set up, if you go to Tools, Options, Alias, we can add the B key, and the command is just underscore between. I use this all the time. This is super, super helpful. So if you want to drop a point or anything between two places, and in fact, we can even do this more accurately if I do this and say between, drop a point between here and here. I know this is now dead center because it's between those 2 points, and then I can just place it using Gumball and say, well, that's kind of where I want the magic to happen. And then I'm going to use the patch command. And everybody goes, don't use the patch command. Patch command is actually has some cool stuff that it'll do. But we have to take into account that there may be not enough stuff around here to join it, which is fine. We can deal with that. Okay. Now, the cool thing about this is if I run history, say always record, and I do patch again, with those 3 elements, and I preview it, and I say, okay, that's fine, let's do that. But now if I want to mess with it, because I did this with history, if I drag this point, boo, come on. Make sure I got history on. There we go. Now if I grab this and adjust it, this will now update. So now I can sculpt with it, and I can say how much kind of little flibbity nuance do I want in here, and I can kind of play with this and say, you know, I can even do stuff like this where it's now a little pushy-pulley kind of thing, you know, depending on what, and this is the kind of stuff that you throw it through a printer and you see how it feels, you know, is this an interesting way when you flip this knife open and closed, does this feel good on your thumb, or does it actually need to be an indent or an impression? Now, the downside of patch is oftentimes it won't join. And you can see 2 surfaces joined into a closed poly surface. In this case, it did. And if we turn on add objects, if we turn on our naked edges, it actually did join up, which is great. If it didn't, all we would need to do is build a little transition surface between this surface and this surface. Okay? And that can be a blend surface. It can be, you know, you just trim a little gap and then build a little blend surface. So the last thing we need to do is just add the logo. So let's do that in shaded view. I'm just going to hide my curves. And I'm going to just do that with a text object. And let's do Stabco is the name of the company. And we're just going to pick a font that's somewhere, some kind of scripty something or other. I don't know what I was thinking, which font I was using, but let's just pick a scripty one. That'll work. Say OK. Nope, that's not what we wanted. Is there anything more interesting than watching someone pick a font? All right, let's do that one. Scale this down. Can look at this and figure out where the original design for this was supposed to be. And I think I actually would like to change its location a little bit. I think I would like it to be a little bit up here like this. The other thing is this is too upright. So I think what I want to do is shear this a little bit. So I'm going to pick this and run the shear command. And the origin point is going to be down here. We're going to start from vertical, and then we're just going to shear it a little more like that. Make it a little bit more italic. And then I might actually orient it slightly different to the blade, something like that. And then because I added some thickness to this and made it a solid object when I did my text, I just need to poke it in like this. Make sure it actually punches in there, and then we're just going to do a Boolean subtract. And then we're going to add a different material in here. We're going to make a new metal. And this one's going to just be a little darker. And we're going to do a sub-object assignment to that because we control object selected that. Now, this was internal and this was internal, so we don't want that. So I'm going to reassign this one back to there. And then when we look at it, that's going to have a little bit of darkness to it so that it shows up better. Now, the other thing that we might want to do is we actually might want a third metal. And this one, we might want to do, this metal is set to, let's set that one to like stainless. And then let's make this one very light so that we get a slightly different look so that that facet really shows up so that you can see it. And then the last thing that we would want to do is, we can go in and do our little micro fillets and all that kind of stuff on that. For something that's going to go through a printer, I would probably stop here, because when you start adding fillets, if you need to change something, then you have to take the fillets out, right? So for a concept model, I typically don't put fillets in from the very beginning. First of all, because by the time you get it off the printer, excuse me, by the time you get it off the printer and do a little bit of sanding and stuff, you get some fillets on it anyways. Obviously, for production, you're gonna add the fillets in the end. But when you're doing concept modeling, I tend to not fillet stuff early, just so that I can keep track of what's going on. And if I have to change something, it makes it easy to change it. Okay, so the last thing that I'll probably do is just run a full render off of this, and I think I'm going to change my rendering settings just a little bit. Right now, the background of this is the 360 environment. I don't like that. I'm going to just change it to white. And then the other thing that's not happening is the environment is too high. And so the horizon line is too high, and I'm not getting a good reflection on the blade. So let's go back into the environment. Let's click on it. Let's go to the image. And we can adjust it using the altitude. And I'm going to just bring this down a little bit. You can see that the horizon line drops as I do that. And I can place it somewhere where when I render, I'm starting to get a reflection on that. Now, with a white background, this is kind of blowing out a little bit. And so if I go back to the studio and the intensity, maybe I drop the intensity to like 0.8, maybe even lower. And then I also may want to do something where I'm not using a dead black background or a dead white background. Position it in a way. I want to be able to kind of see it in relationship to the sketch. The other thing that I can do is I can play with this and I can actually rotate the model a little bit. And you'll see as I rotate it, I can actually fake where the horizon line is hitting. So if I take this and I tip it up just a hair, I can kind of pick where that's going to go. And then maybe the stainless itself needs to be just a hair less reflective. So if I bring the roughness down just a little bit, and maybe the color needs to be just a little bit darker, just so we get a little contrast out of it. Getting the top, getting the bottom, seeing the facet on the bottom. This facet down here, I may want to crank the polish on that up, or here's a fun trick. I may even not make this metal. I may actually make this plastic and make it fully white so that it actually renders completely different, so that you're actually really picking up on that. And then maybe in the background, maybe white is a little bit too much. Maybe we drop this to something like that, just so we get a little bit of contrast. And then we might have a ground plane on here. Looks like it's there already. And then let's just run a little ray trace off of it. And you can see where it's counting up here in the bottom right corner. If you go to the properties and we turn on while it's rendering, if we turn on the post effects, I have the denoiser turned on, so it's already taken the noise out of this, so I don't need to wait for it to all the way to go to 1,000. I can just run it till the noise is gone and then say go. You may want to play around with like different colored backgrounds. Maybe the background pulls out of here. Maybe the image is maybe the image works, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you don't want the image in the background. Maybe you need to do a different angle or something like that. This is where you can start, really kind of playing with it to see how you get an image that effectively communicates what you're trying to do. And in this case, we've got a nice horizon line. This is kind of reading the blade nicely. We can still kind of see the image. We might even want to do something like play with the image where we unlock it. Maybe the image needs to be smaller. Maybe it needs to be closer. Just however you want to compose your shot. We can even raise this up a little bit, because if we raise this up, then the ground plane is going to get closer and you're going to start picking up a little bit of shadow under that. If we hide that completely, you'll see that now we're starting to get some ground plane shadow out of that, because this is now the ground plane. If we bring it back, it's picking up the bottom of this edge of this image to calculate where the bottom of the scene is, because the ground plane is being calculated automatically. So we lose a little bit of that drop shadow. So you might want to need to add some other lights in your scene or anything like that. But for an early model, I think this is probably plenty. And I think I probably want this to be oriented a little different. The last thing I might do is change it from 50 lens to a 35. Gives a little bit more perspective to the scene. A little bit more force on the perspective. Okay, something like that. I'll probably just let it run like that, let it finish up. Any questions so far? Any questions on anything you saw? Anything that didn't make sense? I'd be more than happy to go back and revisit it a little bit. If not, I will let you go because I think we landed this in just about an hour with a little bit of blabbing. With a quick question, do me a favor, send an email to tech, TECH, at mcneil.com and outline the issues that you're having, and I will get you connected to a developer that can give you a much more detailed answer. Tech at McNeil. And that goes for everybody. If you have an issue that you need covered, that's the email to get a hold of us. So sorry for a weird question. What is the best place to look for freelance work? We actually on the forum, which is here, there is a jobs board that you can post either you're looking for a job or take a look to see whether there is jobs. I'll stick that in the chat as well. You're quite welcome. Any other questions? By the way, this is our YouTube, Rhinoceros 3D at YouTube. That's where all these videos are going to be. This was the last one we did, this floral ring. It'll all be here. There's a playlist. All this getting started for Rhino for Windows, it'll be stuck in here. Okay, so this is the playlist where it'll be. Stick that in. All right, any other questions? Awesome. All right. Thank you for joining. My name's Kyle Houchins. I'm tech and a trainer for McNeil. This was Getting Started Rhino for Windows. Go make great stuff. Thanks. Bye.